At this time, a countless number of videos have been made analyzing the personality and character of Dutch van der Linde. Most of it centers around breaking his true intentions down, whether if he was always the person he ended up becoming by the end of the game, or if over time he just gradually started to change. And this change being a cumulative result of Micah being in his ear, instigating the more volatile habits he was starting to display. A display of brutality and carelessness that was a result of constant stress and having to move from camp to camp, desperately avoiding the law or having to deal with what he was seeing as increasing dissent from within his own ranks, most notably from Arthur, John, and even Hosea. Later during the events of Beaver Hollow, Arthur mentions Dutch may have always been like this, and even John later admits a similar sentiment towards Sadie. And he admits this during the epilogue when the two of them are riding to take care of a bounty that Sadie is heading. And it's while on this ride to try and recover an outlaw that was robbed off of her, the two of them start to talk about the gang in the old days.
You heard anything of Dutch?
Nothing. You?
No. You'd think. He's a colorful character. Word would get out.
That's one way of putting it. Look, what happened with the gang changed everyone who was a part of it. The Dutch who put a blanket round me after the O'Driscolls, that weren't the same man at Beaver Hollow. And now, he might not be so colorful no more.
You see a man whose character changed. I see a man who got found out for who he truly was. We was fools to follow him. I was a fool and I paid for it. And I was one of the lucky ones.
Micah, John. Micah's the one who set it off.
I blame me for following Dutch for too long, but I blame Micah for most everything else.
While the topic of Dutch always being the crazed lunatic we see towards the end of the game and starts to resemble more of the bloodthirsty outlaw that is more than willing to kill people for what he just calmly describes as doing it for sport.
You and your friend there, the professor, we're gonna kill the both of you.
Why you want to do a thing like that?
I don't know. Sport, I guess.
Today we're going to tackle a little bit more of a complex issue, a little bit of a two-parter, and that is, did Dutch somewhat redeem himself at the end of the game? Why did he shoot Micah, and did this symbolize one good thing for the series of bad things that he's done? And I'm not referring to bad things that he's done to people outside of the gang. I'm referring to people that fell directly under his leadership, that he led to destruction, to death, to, in Strauss's case, possibly even torture. Yes, to a degree they were willing participants. It's not exactly like Dutch was holding them at gunpoint, at least not in the beginning, but throughout the entire game, Dutch is constantly hammering home that he has the power. He is the key to their future, to making it out of this life, to shaking the law, the Pinkertons, and any other stress and issues that they're going to be going through. They just have to invest all of their faith, all of their trust, all of their money, and ultimately all of their power within Dutch himself. From various conversations throughout the game, these people following Dutch all have their own stories, their own experiences, and first-hand accounts of witnessing Dutch be their savior. And slowly over time, it's not just a feeling of sticking to Dutch's side out of pure love and trust and believing in his philosophy and his vision for the world, how to live and how to conduct themselves, but it becomes a battle of something similar more to obligation. I think John's hesitancy to take Arthur's advice to take his wife and son and just run shows us that.
Arthur.
How you doing?
Nervous? But I've been nervous for a while. I had a lot of time to think in that jail, and I feel like I just don't know Dutch no more.
You ain't the only one.
And this plan to get us out, it just feels, I don't know.
Like he's stringing us along, I know.
Killing in cold blood, revenge, we all do bad things, but he seems to enjoy it now. It's like he just wants to create more enemies, more chaos.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I love Dutch. He saved me a long time ago. I feel like in Saint Denis, when I got arrested, maybe he could have done something.
I feel like you should take your woman and child and get lost.
Do you?
What reason you got to stick around at this point? It's done. I don't see no way out of any of this.
What about loyalty?
That's long been broken.
Obviously, this is just one specific example, but John trying to rationalize it, not just with Arthur, but even himself, I think is a good depiction of what lies at the core of everyone's problem here. And it's even an angle that Dutch abuses most of the game. What happened to all of you? What's with all of you doubting me? Don't you trust me? Have I led any of you wrong before? Well, he may be doing things or at the very least sharing ideas such as paying Leviticus Cornwall a visit, or dealing with Cornwall Driscoll because he's always there to get them and they need to get him before he gets Dutch or any other members back first, or having to take care of Angelo Bronte because he won't let them live or escape, because Dutch knows the type of man that he is and he's just someone that needs to be dealt with now rather than just let live. These are a series of things that Dutch continues to use to try and suppress any individual thought, any critical thinking. Dutch and every single member is constantly going from problem to problem, and when someone wisens up to it, then Dutch reminds them, everything that you've had, everything that you are now, I've helped you. So can't you help me? Help me with this single problem and we can escape further west and hopefully land on this tropical island of Tahiti and live a life of leisure. I just need you to stick by my side just a little while longer. Just one more score, just one more take, just one more problem. And you'll no longer live a life of worry, having to struggle or be afraid of the law or having to look over your shoulder terrified and a Driscoll will spot them or someone else will recognize them and that results in another fight, leading to even more bloodshed. I think this is a very important thing to understand before we go down the road of answering if Dutch redeemed himself, because everyone has this idea of Dutch. He was an adopted father. He's a savior. He's fighting for justice in an unjust world. He's a beacon of hope in a world that's slowly pushing them towards the flames of extinction. Their way of life, these quality of people, they have no place in civilization. Dutch began to slowly destroy that image, and then by the 6th chapter was destroying it in an extremely grand scale. He was the polar opposite of what he once was, at least on the surface in front of all these people that believed he cared for them. Whether if Dutch was always this person or not, whether if it became a change in perception or it was just a series of mistakes that Dutch couldn't recover from and he just decided to give up. Even if he was always a bad man doing horrible things, the silver lining, at least in their eyes, was he was at least putting a code of conduct that seemed different than any other gangs were doing. And while it could be claimed that he manipulated Arthur and John, who were children, when he took them under his wing, in their eyes, he still saved them from a life that was probably much worse. Hosea possibly had more of a hand in that than we give him credit for, teaching the boys right from wrong and ensuring Dutch's more unsavory tendencies stayed in check, as to not upset his right-hand man, but it was still an image that stayed in everyone's mind. And as Dutch began to betray the person that they all seen him as, they all started to rationalize it by looking for other factors and sources to blame, most notably of which, Micah. Personally, I don't think the intent to go to Tahiti or really escape this life was an option for Dutch. If it ever was, he abandoned that a long time ago. He could have very well split up the gang members and used someone who's less likely to be known to have an affiliation with the gang to retrieve the money out in Blackwater, or utilize the women better to rob certain opportunities. Hosea throughout the game was more for taking advantage of cons and tricking people that way. I think if you really break the story down, there might have been some key moments where they really could have escaped had that really been an option for Dutch. Whether if he was just addicted to the life of an outlaw or being the center of attention, having others rely on him the way that they did, always looking to him for guidance, wanting that position of power, or just having people he saw as disposable, pawns that you can utilize to become this mythical outlaw. Whatever the reason, I believe at the end of the game we can see that ultimately Dutch is just out for himself now. He still claims that they're all family and Arthur and John are his sons, despite him blatantly leaving them both to die on separate occasions. The concept of them being family and no one being left behind is just a shallow saying with the hope of evoking the emotions of past experiences, making it easier to forget the clear betrayal.
Dutch!
John?
You left me! You left me to die! My boy, I didn't have a choice. John, I didn't have a choice. Left me!
I wish we got a little more insight as to how Dutch and Micah interact. We get some instances here and there in Clemens Point and Horseshoe Overlook where Micah's sucking up to him, telling him he's such a special man, that he idolizes Dutch and even offers to go and retrieve the Blackwater money by himself. Don't get me wrong, they are important interactions that provide insight as to how Micah possibly slowly weaseled his way into Dutch's good graces in such a very short period of time, but these are interactions to provide us with the concrete information to definitively say that how Dutch ends up at the end of the game is how Dutch always was, or if it genuinely was Micah pushing him in a direction that seemed easier. And I think that's another element to all of this, because then it can provide more insight as to whether if Dutch was always like this or if it was something that just happened over time. But if you really want to cut it very black and white, from everybody else's perspective, there probably would be no redemption for Dutch, and that would be for two specific deaths that Dutch witnesses. Deaths of two members that were the pillars of the Vanderlinde gang, 2 out of the 4 original founding members. And the first one is Miss Grimshaw. She outright gets shot by Micah for no reason other than Micah being challenged by her and siding with Arthur. Micah sees an opening and just outright guns her down, which Dutch witnesses, and he does nothing but just stand there. He doesn't question Micah, doesn't argue with him or reprimand him whatsoever for killing a woman who has been the center of the entire gang's camp upkeep. She was the one that kept everything running smoothly and making sure everyone was working. She's been here since day one, and Micah guns her down in cold blood. Dutch doesn't even bat an eye. No betrayal, she didn't snitch, no breaking of loyalty whatsoever. There was just no reason to just leave it be like he did. Then we have the death of Arthur, Dutch's alleged son, the man that gave him his entire life. Even if we just go the route of the honorable ending where Micah doesn't completely kill Arthur, Dutch still chooses to ignore Arthur's pleas, to listen to him, to at the very least acknowledge that he might have been the rat the entire time. While he may walk off in a completely separate direction from Micah, he still lets Micah live. And that alone is damn near unforgivable. It's an outright betrayal of Arthur. And to go a little further, it's a betrayal of Miss Grimshaw, Hosea, and everything the gang ever claimed to stand for. Loyalty, being different and not forgetting about each other or just treating each other as a nameless gunman. No different than how Colm looks at his own disposable men. No sense of caring for their well-being or having any personal connection to these people. Their one and only purpose is to die for the glory of their leader. The entire concept of this being a family, while it was hanging by the hinges for quite some time, it was in this moment where it completely shattered. In Arthur's eyes and anyone else who would have witnessed Dutch walk away in this moment. Perhaps it was a reason why Dutch shot Micah years later on the hilltop. If it was just Micah, John, and Dutch, and Sadie had no part in it, or at least Dutch was completely unaware of her presence, I don't believe Dutch would have sided with John and took aim at Micah the way that he does. I believe he either would have sided with Micah or left them to it and walked away the same way he did when it came down to Micah and Arthur all the years ago, during the final moments of Arthur's life. I believe between here and when Arthur was pleading and begging for him to see all the damage Micah was responsible for, or at the bare minimum can be blamed for encouraging a plan of action that was never their way of doing things, perhaps it was in this moment staring down into the eyes of a dying Arthur, Dutch finally realized all the damage he was doing. Damaged those he once called a family. The acknowledgement of pain and disappointment in Dutch's face is unmistaken. Maybe deep down he was aware of everything he was doing and the path he was taking, losing sight of the fact that these are genuine people that he once upon a time may have genuinely cared for. With him finally getting the time to look into the eyes of a sick Arthur on his deathbed, something that he probably hasn't done in a very long time, just made everything surreal. It's easy to dispose of people or to paint them as the bad guys. Someone you could just cast off and convince yourself it's for the best. They aren't helping anymore, or are now more of a problem than someone who has good intentions and are looking out for your well-being. It wouldn't be too far-fetched to say this was a line of thought Dutch had subscribed to, since he time and again said to Arthur he's always doubting him and he no longer has any faith in him. A sentiment that would only deepen upon the realization that Arthur was helping rains fall and the Wapitis in direct opposition to Dutch's plans.
You help this fella, Arthur?
Please, what of it?
What else you been doing behind Dutch's back?
What?
The wars are over. We have lost. These young men will be annihilated. Please.
I'll see what I can do. Charles, who else will come with me?
Oh, all right, Arthur. Who knows what other secrets I'll learn about.
Say what you will, but ultimately, time and again, Arthur's own actions during Beaver Hollow was solidifying a sentiment that he was more of an obstacle. And with less time spent between the two of them, strengthening that perception, which was increased even more by Arthur's questioning the Dutch's plans and intentions every time they did work together, only causing more of a headache. However, hearing Arthur's pleas and this once terrifying gunman that helped Dutch take the world by storm face down in the dirt, struggling to breathe, it humanized Arthur and helped Dutch remember everything he stood for at a time. While he decides to let Micah walk now, I believe Arthur's final message to Dutch of not being able to trust Micah finally got through to him. Whether if it was shame, embarrassment, guilt, the realization that he couldn't trust Micah, or the fact that the tattered legacy of loyalty, whatever remained of it within Dutch himself, was reignited and he decided to walk away, to not venture off into the sunset with Micah.
Come on, Dutch! Come on!
It's a complicated issue from Dutch's point of view because, on the one hand, he may acknowledge his recent mistakes and wrongdoing, but the chance to recover from it is long gone. The gang is in a state of disarray with all the women and Jack long gone, removing any sense of some type of hope for the future. Arthur is practically dead. Dutch and Micah just chased John away as if that really meant anything. I think Dutch long made up his mind against John. Ultimately, Dutch had three choices: walk away, ride off with Micah, or kill Micah. With a price on his own head and the huge number of Pinkertons surrounding them, the distraction of Micah was something that he needed. While he may not escape with Micah by his side, at least he can count on not having to deal with an entire army of lawmen on just him and him alone. It may not be an actual step towards redemption, but by Dutch walking away from Micah, it's more of a leaving well enough alone type of response. There's no sense of betraying the legacy of his fallen comrades more by mingling with someone who very well may have been the source of the gang's entire misfortune by feeding the Pinkertons all the information. Dutch had to have known there was a rat no matter what. Micah was the one finally pinned as the source of the gang's misfortune, which hampered his plans for the future a little bit more because this is the guy that he's been planning everything out with. It's best to just drop the whole situation. It's a positive move to just move on. Now, we don't know what Dutch gets into during the time between Beaver Hollow and the game's epilogue. A few years later, there's practically no word of Dutch or Micah until the very end of the gang's epilogue. Micah's formed his own gang. He's become more violent and much more unpredictable, and it's with the intention of killing him that John and Sadie accidentally run into Dutch, who claims he's here for the same reason as John.
What are you doing here, Dutch?
Same as you, I suppose.
Dutch and I are teaming up once more. We got money. We got dreams. Join us, John.
John's been shouting all kinds of things towards Micah as he guns down his men left and right, and the fact that John and Micah weren't exactly getting along the last time they were in Dutch's presence should make it clear enough that Dutch knows why John is here. To not exactly to team up or to recuperate any lost money from all those years ago. Or, maybe in Dutch's mind, it might have been. After all, it's a little coincidental that all the money from Blackwater's here in this cabin, and out of all the times John could have come to pay Micah a social call, it's the day that he and Dutch is in the cabin with all this lost cash. So I don't think Dutch ever came here to actually kill Micah. He may have been referring to the money, or in his usual enigmatic self, he just kind of shrugged off John's question. I just say that clearly because I've seen that proposed before, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think Dutch came here to kill Micah. I think after some time of either trying to form his own gang from the ground up or maybe trying his own hand on living alone for some time, he just decided to go the easy way, returning to Micah and seeking him out and creating plans for a new future for the both of them. Micah's got the manpower and the resources, and Dutch is getting older. He's got the wisdom. He still has that charisma. They can make it work this time. There's nothing holding them back after all. Things are different. As Micah says, it's a new century. With all the time passing in between the years of the Vanderlinde gang and Arthur's own death, I believe Dutch came back to give this whole partnership with Micah a second go. Until John pays an unexpected visit and the memory of Arthur is brought up again.
Let her go.
Now I can't do that, John.
Dutch. Dutch, come on now.
You shot at me, son.
You started it.
You betrayed me.
I could say the same as you.
I was trying to do my best. You just cared for yourself.
I think differently.
Join us. Join us, John.
Let her go! She ain't well.
I don't want to kill you, John.
Arthur saved my life. More than once.
Arthur's been dead a long time. This is a new century.
Dutch. Dutch. We all did our best for you. Ain't our fault. Things turned out the way they did. Dutch, killing me won't solve nothing.
Put down your gun, Marston!
Say something, Dutch. Say something.
I ain't got too much to say no more.
Dutch walks off and is visibly upset towards John. But facial expressions aside, this time in Arthur's death are the only two moments where Dutch really has nothing left to say. Bringing Arthur's name up could have brought Dutch back to that night many years ago, where with his final breath, Arthur musters the strength to inform Dutch Micah's a rat. Feeling as if it was a lifetime ago, John summoning Arthur's name and the valiant effort Arthur made to spare him and his family to get them out of this life could very well have reminded Dutch that he can't escape his past. He can't escape the betrayal that he partook in for harboring a rat, for allowing so many people to die under his watch and do nothing. I think if it wasn't for John mentioning Arthur's name, taking them all back to that time, I don't think Dutch would have turned on Micah. He almost had no reason to. If Arthur's name was buried in the past, so was everyone else's misdeeds, including Dutch's. I mentioned earlier that if it wasn't for Sadie being present, Dutch may have sided with Micah, but rethinking it now, I don't think Sadie being present or not was really all that important. I don't think it mattered, unless it was all about Dutch still saving face and he cared about being seen as a noble, charismatic person, and he valued Sadie's perception of him, then her being there or not, I don't think would have changed anything. Dutch didn't have the weight of having to carry on this facade, to wear this mask, to conduct himself and act in accordance with a law and a creed that he wanted those underneath him to operate within. He had nobody like that anymore, so he can do and say as he so pleased. All this time passing made him a different man with different circumstances. If it wasn't for Arthur's name coming up, I don't think Micah would have been the victim of a gunshot from Dutch. With that said, I don't think Dutch did it out of avenging his friend, his brother, his son. I believe he did it out of doing the right thing. Not morally, I think that's a different topic, but the right thing as in something that Micah had coming. The thing that he possibly wanted to do in front of Arthur all those years ago, but given the law's presence and other members still looking to him for leadership and the plans he already had with Micah and everyone else, those factors were no longer necessary to consider. It was as simple as, is Micah going to finally get what's coming to him, or am I going to spare him yet again? In Dutch's head, as he so likes to rationalize things and make himself appear to be so noble, I don't doubt he redeemed himself by betraying Micah. He may well have convinced himself that he avenged Arthur. But the reason for putting Micah down, I don't think it was a selfless act whatsoever, and I think Dutch leaving all that money behind was a repeat of what he did with Arthur. It's easier to just leave it be, drop it all, and walk away. From the outside perspective, there is no redemption for Dutch in all that he's done. For betraying Miss Grimshaw, Arthur, the legacy of Hosea, and what the entire Vanderlinde gang stood for succumbing to reckless impulses and listening to someone that has only been riding with the gang for 6 months over the counsel of Hosea and even Arthur. In his own head, he may have redeemed himself to some degree by putting Micah down, but that doesn't allow him to shake all that he's done and how easy it was for him to just shrug off everything that happened to those that looked to him for guidance, for a way out of this horrible life. And he definitely didn't shoot Micah out of vengeance for Arthur, out of redemption for himself, for doing the right thing. I think it looked as if it was just a bunch of children fighting, arguing, and complaining, and in Dutch's head it was much simpler to just shoot one and move on, with Micah being a much easier target. Because whether if Dutch wanted to accept it or admit it or not, John, Sadie, Charles, and everyone else that lived from the Vanderlinde gang will all attribute the downfall to Micah. But let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Do you agree with my take on this? What's your variation of it? Better yet, because I wanted to simplify it and use the honorable ending of Arthur's life. Some people don't like to accept whether if that is or isn't canon, so based off the different death that Arthur is given, and of course Dutch's corresponding response and reaction to all of that, why do you think Dutch shot Micah? Do you think it was ever on the table that he would have actually put the gun to Sadie or John, or maybe even both of them? Do you agree with me, or do you have a completely different stance? Let's talk down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, and your take on this. But like always, my name is Cynic. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.